Hello, I'm Reverend Dr. Elliot Robinson with the R3 podcast, where we look at race, religion, and rhetoric through the lens of misinformation and disinformation. As I promised you, we were going to begin to take a delve into Christian nationalism, or as you will see as we move along, more so it's really white Christian nationalism. We're going to begin looking at what it is on a very surface level, because I would like the two individuals that I'm going to focus on to really provide you with insight into the gist of what's underneath the engine of what is being sold to the public as simply Christian nationalism. This idea that we're looking at a country that is run by Christians. And so it is a Christian nation, similar to what you may say another country is an Islamic nation, as an Islamic state. If we're being honest, they are viewing the United States as a Christian state. And when I say state, I'm talking in the macro sense, not individual states. So it's a Christian country. So on the surface, that's how it's being promoted. One of the big promoters of this concept of Christian nationalism is Reverend Doug Wilson. Wilson is the pastor of a church in Moscow, Idaho called Christ Church. This church is a part of an affiliation of churches known as the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches. This group has come together under auspices of following certain creeds, certain doctrine, but they have a particular lens with which they view the United States. And so we're going to explore that through the words of those individuals. And then in a later episode, I will kind of give my overview on what I see as the crux of Christian nationalism. I want to say white Christian nationalism. Spoiler alert, but that's kind of where I stand on it because of what they say. And so we're going to look at the words of Doug Wilson, what he's talking about. And what's interesting is he recently opened up a church in Washington, D.C., and guess who attended the opening service? No, it was not the president. It was Pete Hegseth. What? The defense secretary? Absolutely. Why? Because he is a member of an affiliated church of the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches. And you will get to see, I think, a little more in depth why he is making some of the decisions that he has made in relation to the various branches of the government, as well as the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, now the Department of War. So these episodes will help give you insight into some of the cultural pieces that we are seeing now and how they're being kind of forced upon us, but where they're coming from. And so Christian nationalism is really part of an engine that we're seeing in cultural upheaval in the United States of America. They are, again, looking at a Christian theocracy where the country is led and controlled by Christians. They also have very antiquated views on women and women's place in society, women's role in the home, women in general. They also have very divisive views as it relates to other religions and faith traditions being in the United States of America. So I want to kind of give you that piece so that you can know what's coming. We'll have some excerpts from a CNN interview that Doug Wilson did recently, but I think more insightful will be the words of from his own podcast and various shows that he's been on. So I have a multitude of clips that we're going to go through, but they again will allow you to see what Christian nationalism really is all about. Enjoy.
Would you define yourself as a Christian nationalist?
Yes.
And how do you define that?
Well, mostly because I much prefer it to the names I usually get called.
How do you define that? Is it you are a Christian and you want this nation to be a Christian nation?
Yeah, I'm a Christian, and I'm an American who loves this country. Mm-hmm. So put those two things together. And since I believe that my Christianity is not something that is to be believed by me behind my eyes and between my ears, it's a public truth.
What do you say to people of different faiths all over the world who don't believe that and have a different God, a different understanding of life and how we all came here?
Yeah, I would say let's have a Bible study. Let's talk about it. Depending on what they've heard, I would want to assure them that the fact that we differ over who God is or differ over ultimate reality does not give me warrant to persecute you. So we're going to talk about this because the Christian faith does not advance by the sword. The Christian faith advances by preaching, the sword of the Spirit, planting churches, preaching, declaring, etc. So I'd want to visit with them. I'd want to imitate what the Apostle Paul did all through the book of Acts. He comes to Athens and he preaches Christ and the resurrection to a city full of idolaters, but he doesn't mount a military campaign. Yeah.
What would you say to historic scholars who say America was not founded as a Christian nation?
I would have fun with them.
Don't you think if the framers had the same vision as you, that this is a Christian nation, that they would have made that explicit in the Constitution and not have put in the Establishment Clause and the prohibition of religious tests for office holders, that they would have made it explicit in the documents?
The federal government may not have a Church of the United States. Like the Church of England, the Church of Denmark is the Lutheran Church. They flat prohibited a Church of the United States. And they flat prohibited religious tests for office at the federal level.
Thomas Jefferson, for his part, was a big proponent of religious liberty.
Right.
It was one of his big accomplishments. Yeah. It's on his gravestone that he had this religious liberty law passed in Virginia.
Yeah.
So what would you say to historic scholars who would point to that and say, the framers of this country did not mean for this to be a Christian nation. They meant for it to be a nation where people can exercise their religion freely, no matter what that religion is.
First, I would invite these historic scholars in the most friendly way possible to have a public debate on the subject. I think I don't want to, King Ahab in the Old Testament says, let not him who puts on his armor boast like him who takes it off. But I think I would do okay. And I think I would do okay because I'd be able to point to the primary documents.
Wilson is very good at pivoting off of a question. And so he has a excellent media training, obviously, but he's able to slide off a question by then offering what I might do in the future. And so she asks some pretty straightforward questions regarding where is the source of your fundamental or your foundational belief that the intent was that this would be a Christian nation. And he's talked about, well, we can debate, well, I can go to primary sources, but he did not provide those sources in the moment, because clearly if you're willing to debate, then you must have those sources in memory, because they are the foundation for your movement. So he did pivot off of that, and so we still don't really know, at least from this interview, where he stands on what he believes is a fundamental truth. And so he talks about it in other areas, but for our purposes, I find personally that it's kind of thin, but that's a premise of Christian nationalism, that it was in fact the intention at the founding of this country that Christianity could in fact be and should be the religion of this country. Now we will have a few clips on their thoughts on other religions and how they should function and operate in the United States of America. In the very first clip, I want you to pay attention to how he pivots off of the initial question. She poses 3 different religions. He counters back with 2 religions. And so I want you to look at that, because that is providing insight into really their viewpoint, their worldview on who should exist within the United States. And it also just kind of, I think in some ways, panders in some ways to an audience that may be listening, and an attempt to not alienate another audience as they're trying to grow this movement in the States. So again, these next few clips will be dealing with how they feel about other religions in the United States.
As well.
How would a Muslim or a Mormon or even a Catholic fit into your version of a Christian nation?
Yeah. So one of the reasons we have such problems with assimilating Muslims and all these different Hindus is that there are so many of them, right? So if we had a Christian republic and a Muslim came to Disneyland with his family, we have no problems. But when they fill up Dearborn, Michigan, that's just not. You can. It says in Amos 3:3, can 2 walk together except they be agreed? You cannot put alien worldviews together, cheek by jowl, and have peace, right? So basically, I think a lot of the religious turmoil that we have, the clashes that we would have, could be addressed by a sane immigration policy, not a policy that tries to regulate what people can say or do in their religious convictions while here.
So the foundation for you is you believe this is a Christian nation,
Right.
despite the debate from historic scholars.
Exactly. But notice that when the Muslim says to me, "Who are you to say?" I can say, "All right, we have to live together. Who are you to say which way it should go?" And then the secularist comes in and says, "Let's do it this way." And Muslim and I would both turn to him and say, "And who are you to say?"
So you feel like we can't have a functioning society
Yeah, we can't.
without.
And look at our society currently, not functioning.
Baptizing them. What is a baptized nation? It is a Christian nation. How many of these Christian nations are there supposed to be? No set number is given, but the simple answer is all of them. All the nations of men are to be brought into submission to Christ. But in the current climate, is there any possible way to seek to make America a Christian nation without drawing the charge of Christian nationalism? No, there's no way to do this without drawing that charge. Should we care about this? Not even a little bit. Some will say that it is not possible to make a nation into a Christian nation. Nations don't have immortal souls and cannot be Christian. To which I would reply, why did Jesus tell us to do it then?
Let me ask you this. Would you be comfortable with deporting people of Muslim faith in the United States, knowing that its practice is fundamentally incompatible, and if they have their own communities, they would ultimately never assimilate into the United States?
I would recognize that that's a very severe problem that we have to solve. I don't think that we can solve it by deporting them, but I would want to solve it by other means, right? So, for example, and this is going to sound, well, I'll just say it anyway. I think that what you have to do is, if we continue to push for a Christian nation, I think we ought to say yes to church bells, no to minarets. The public space belongs to Jesus. You can't have a prayer tower calling for prayer. Muslim, I don't think a Muslim should be able to hold political office, for example. What I'd want to do is, with the people who are already here, I'd want to address it in a way that would encourage abandonment of Islam, encourage evangelization, and with, in the cases of some, encourage them to voluntarily deport themselves, because the plan's not going according to the plan. 3,000 mosques in the United States. Well, it's because 50,000 Muslims came here. Well, let's not do that. Let's not do that. That's one thing. The second thing is, assuming that they're already here, I have no problem with them gathering together and praying together and doing that sort of thing, but no minarets. Church bells, a minaret is a Muslim prayer tower,
Right.
a public call to prayer.
Yep.
The public spaces would belong to Christ, right? So no minarets. If they wanted to get together in private and pray, fine, but no public claiming of the territory. Church bells are fine. Minarets would not be fine.
If we're trying to establish a Christian country, should we have our borders open or allow Muslims to come in and live in a country that's distinctly Christian?
I would say no, in any kind of significant number, because it's the problem of assimilation. So if in a Christian republic, could a Muslim come and visit Disneyland? Well, sure, but in a Christian republic there might not be a Disneyland. but let's not get led astray. Yeah, could they? There's no border policy in terms of visiting and that sort of thing. If we were a Christian nation, then let's say a Muslim moved here, and let's say he was allowed to green card it, and he was settled down here. In the ideal setup, he couldn't hold office. He could, because we're a Christian nation, and he's not a Christian. Right. But that doesn't mean we imprison him or torture him.
Skirmish on Twitter with someone a few weeks ago where they pointed out there was a hubbub about, I just came back from NatCon 4 in Washington, D.C., and that was an eclectic affair because there were Catholics and Protestants and Jews and a couple of Hindus. And there were people raising an uproar, what are you doing with Hindus at this political thing? And I wrote, well, in the republic I envision, Hindus would not be able to hold political office. Are you in? Right? Yeah. And the person, no. I want Hindus to be able to run for political office in America. And I said, okay, so you're criticizing me for being willing to talk to a Hindu at a conference, and you're willing to be governed by Hindus? And this makes no sense. Yeah. So in the Christian Nationalist Project, we don't want this smudge or hodgepodge. We want it to be explicitly Christian. We would want prayers at the political convention to be to God the Father in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. That's how we want the prayers to go. H-1B visas are for highly skilled workers who come to the U.S. legally. The number set by Congress for such visas annually is 65,000, with room for 20,000 more if they have graduate degrees from U.S. colleges. But nevertheless, that's a lot of Hindus. Remember that these are skilled and ambitious people likely to rise to positions of influence and control. That means that when it comes to America retaining its distinct identity as a nation, they clearly represent a diluting agent.
Now you know why I enjoy allowing people to speak for themselves. Because if you listen to his initial clip on the CNN interview, it was somewhat innocuous, little inferences here and there, kind of things that make you go, okay, wait a minute, what are you saying here now? Slow down, guy. Slow down, big guy. But then as you begin to hear him speak more on this subject, it is crystal clear where he stands on Christian nationalism. But it was interesting in the first clip when I said, pay attention to how he was very selective, at least in how he responded to her in terms of who would be the target of managing their religion. And so she asked about Catholics, which have often been a target of Christian nationalists. She asked about Mormons, and she also asked about people who practice Islam. Well, he flipped it. And he immediately went to Muslims and Hindus. Well, what do they usually have in common? They are people of color. And so in this interview on CNN, he wanted to pivot and shift off of that. And you will see with one of his colleagues, Joel Webbin, who was wide open. And so he makes it more clear who their project is for. If you notice, he calls it the Christian Nationalist Project. They call it a religion, but it really is a project. It's a way in which they seek to reimagine the United States of America through the use of theology. So what I found interesting was he viewed it as religious turmoil to have other faith traditions here in the United States of America. What is interesting is there are so many, tons and tons and tons and tons of organizations around the country that are multi-faith organizations where individuals of different faith traditions are able to come together, they are able to commune. There is generally no turmoil, no strife, no warring between those individuals who are in those groups because they understand that there has to be a respect for an individual's faith tradition in a country that has freedom of religion. He also took a large leap in blaming or saying that the reason why our society is non-functioning was because you had all of these immigrants who came from other countries bringing other religions. Well, clearly we know that that's not why this country has the issues that it has. But that is a common refrain in the Christian nationalist movement. It's the immigrants, it's these other people, it's these other faiths that are coming here and they're messing it up. And I think one of the things that he mentioned was this idea that they have to assimilate or they have to submit themselves to Christianity. And so this idea that in order for you to stay here, you have to assimilate, you have to give up your faith in order for you to stay here. What's interesting is individuals can live in other countries and can live in Muslim dominant countries and not have to give up their faith. But I think, that's an interesting twist that we're seeing, that they would like to move towards a religious state. The things about those that we often have lamented, they want to implement here using Christianity as the veneer for that. He talks about individuals who are not Christian not holding public office, which basically is saying that they are not able to be citizens of the United States of America. You had to peep that, because that is a function of being a citizen, is that you can hold public office. So what he's saying without saying it is that if you are here in this country and you're not a Christian, then you can't be a citizen, because you can't have the rights of citizenship. He also said that there would be no public displays of religion or of your faith, no public expressions of faith, which means that there would be no freedom of religion in a Christian nationalist country. Oddly enough, he mentions the fact that, individuals could have private prayer, but they cannot have public expressions of faith. Well, that sounds like a religion that is being persecuted, that you can only practice that in private. The ways in which this sounds more like an oppressive regime, an oppressive anti-faith regime, is incredibly interesting, and as I'll talk about later, not necessarily Christ-like. We'll leave it at that. But he also uses language that is very much white supremacist in calling these other religions a smudge or a hodgepodge, and that they're not pure. They are, the smudge being a smudge on what is pure, and then a hodgepodge means just a collection of things, but not something that is central. I would say pure, but I don't want to give it that intent. But I will say something that is not central, but something that is thrown together. And so when he used the word smudge, I don't know if that was a slip of the tongue in the interview, but probably not given his audience, but just letting them know that it's a stain on what they're trying to do here. So and he also used the term diluting agent, diluting what is pure. And so we have to think about that when we're talking about Christian nationalism, what their intent, what their goals are. He's giving you basically clues of the perspective of it and how they view it. Now, some would say, well, of course, Elliot, it's, if you have a Christian nation, you don't want to have other religions that are here that are taking away from Christianity. Well, first of all, and again, we can get into this more deeply, there was never the intent that the United States of America would be a Christian nation. That's first of all. Second of all, Christ said make disciples. He didn't say make nations. So that's something that we can look at a little further as we talk about Christian nationalism and the ways in which it's kind of theologically thin. We'll talk about that in later episodes. So those are some things that he brought up in this particular clip, in these particular sets of clips. So we're also going to go back and look a little bit more at his thoughts on Christian nationalism and then also on women. Enjoy.
As you well know, there have been claims
Oh, I know.
that you
Yes.
have minimized or sort of brushed under the rug sexual abuse and violence.
Yes, there have been claims of that nature, and I would say, look at them go. Let them say what they say. It's simply false. So we
Helped a pedophile.
Well, I conducted the marriage ceremony, but I did do that. So, but I didn't set them up. I didn't arrange for it. I didn't. All the things you hear online that I did in that situation.
So why would you marry off a pedophile?
Because it was legal. He's a professing Christian. The woman he married understood his background, understood what she was getting into. I didn't arrange it. It was not an arranged marriage. It was not pressured. It was nothing like that. But basically, when one of the things that people don't realize is what pastors actually have to deal with. Pastors are helping people.
On homosexuality, I mean, the Bible talked about stoning as punishment.
Right.
Would you endorse punishing someone who is gay in the America you want to be living in?
This brings up another old controversy. King Asa in Israel and King Jehoshaphat, both in modern parlance, they both closed the bathhouses. They shut it down. And they exiled, they said, all done with that, and exiling homosexuals. And the scripture praises both men for doing that, which means that the requirement for the death penalty that does exist in Leviticus, that requirement was not a minimum penalty, but was a maximum penalty, because scripture praises the kings who didn't execute the homosexuals. They just shut the orgy down. They just shut the party down. So there is latitude in the application of biblical law. There is latitude in how it's applied from scripture itself.
So, but bottom line, do you see any America and the America you want to be living in where homosexuals are punished?
I think that
because they've decided that they're, they want to live freely as a gay person.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, but that.
Punished how?
When I first began ministering, well, just so you understand how the Overton window has moved. When I first began ministering as a Christian minister, I was grown, an adult, and preaching the gospel. Sodomy was a felony in all 50 states. All 50. Now I didn't begin.
And the Supreme Court, I know, stepped in and overturned that because
no, my point, yeah.
There was the Lawrence ruling.
Correct.
And the Supreme Court said that.
Yeah, the whole thing, we are where we are now. My point is that when I began ministering in 1977, in the late 70s and early 80s, and sodomy was a felony in all 50 states, that America of that day was not a totalitarian hellhole.
So you would like America to go back to that?
Yep.
And someone watching this might be like, you want to control behavior in the bedroom?
Well, yeah. Well, I have the advantage of having built my own house, and people like to say that liberals don't care what you do in your bedroom, but the state had opinions about how thick the sheetrock had to be in the bedroom, how far apart the sheetrock screws had to be, how big the window had to be for egress, and whether or not I could take the mattress off the tag. What do you mean the government doesn't care what happens in the bedroom? They regulate.
And that goes to your sort of libertarian.
That's exactly it.
You're libertarian.
Problem.
You basically think you're David and Goliath.
Yeah.
So over my shoulder right here, there is a poster of the cover of a book, and it says, "It's good to be a man."
Right.
What does that mean?
It means that this is that book is an argument that is a defensive reaction defending young men who don't know who they are because they have been taught their entire life that white heterosexual males are cancerous. So masculinity is tagged as toxic masculinity. If a boy acts like a boy in school, we hit him on the head with a chemical rock. We don't know how to discipline them. We don't know how to make boys stand up straight. We don't know how to make them work hard. We don't know how to train boys as boys who are going to become men. One of the books that I wrote was called Future Men, because boyhood should be aimed at manhood, and boys and girls are not the same, and so you have to train them. You have to train girls to be women, and you have to train boys to be men. And if you don't do that, and you spend your time attacking boys for masculine traits, they're gonna grow up to be pretty screwed up. And
right now, I mean, a lot of people believe that there's a masculinity crisis in the United States. Just when you look at the data of, school test scores, graduation rates, that kind of thing. Are you seeing
absolutely
more men be drawn to your church?
Yes.
Right now?
Yes. One of the things that is attractive to many of the people who have come here is that we're not apologetic about the masculinity that is present here. Now, neither are we apologetic for the femininity, but then as soon as you say masculinity, femininity, people say you're stereotyping. You're saying men are like this and women are like that. And I'd say, yep, we're stereotyping, guilty.
So what does that mean? What role do you think women play in society?
Women are the kind of people that people come out of.
So you just think they're meant to have babies. That's
well,
it. They're just a vessel.
No, it doesn't take any talent to simply reproduce biologically. The wife and mother, who is the chief executive of the home, is entrusted with 3 or 4 or 5 eternal souls.
I'm here as a working journalist, and I'm a mom of 3.
Good for you.
Is that an issue
No?
for you?
And no, it's not automatically an issue.
So, like, in your view of a Christian nation, a Christian America, would this be acceptable that I'm here as a working mom in Idaho?
Sure, it wouldn't
Okay.
be.
Okay.
Sure. This is the thing. There's a difference between what's a sin and a crime. Okay, so in every society, there's certain things that are just, you don't let people do it. All right, it's a crime. It's against the law. Then there are things that I would advise people not to do. Pastorally, it'd be a pastoral advice. It wouldn't be a law. It wouldn't be a rule. So, for example, if you have women who are domestic, talented, educated, and high-powered, and I'm related to a number of those, right? So my wife has written 8 or 9 books, and my daughters have written books. Both my daughters have written books. One daughter has edited an English curriculum, English lit curriculum, and they are a mother of 5 and a mother of 8, and they are full tilt domestic, and they are high energy, talented people. I would say go team go. That's wonderful. At the same time, I don't want to disparage women who want to spend their time in the home just focusing. I don't want to backhand it or disparage it at all. I want to honor that.
I want to honor that.
I want to honor that.
But you're comfortable with a working mom leaving the home and
Sure.
Okay.
Shall we? Back in the bad old days, before the 19th Amendment, the men were considered to be the heads of their households and represented their families at the ballot box. So what happened when their wives were granted suffrage? Let us take a typical presidential election to illustrate it, using the first one in 1920 after women's suffrage was accomplished, the election between Warren Harding and James Cox. If both the husband and wife vote for Harding, say, then what you have done is simply multiply the number of total votes cast for him by 2. And if the husband votes for Harding, say, and the wife votes for Cox, then what you've done is cancel out the voice of that particular household. Upon discovering how they were each going to vote, what would be the harm if the 2 of them just stayed home for a quiet dinner together in order to cancel out one another's vote that way? Where was the great progress supposed to be located? The net effect of women's suffrage was not an advance in women's rights, but rather part of a push to replace covenanted entities, like families, with raw individualism. An overweening state greatly prefers governing an atomistic populace, where each individual is like a BB thrown into an electoral sack. There's no structural rigidity to it, especially after laxity in the law concerning porn, pot, and poker has now greased all the BBs. Nothing coheres anymore. In the older system, the people were grouped in molecules, Burke's little platoons, some of them quite complex, and molecular societies are much more capable of resisting the demands of statism. So the suffrage movement was actually not taking up the cause of women, but rather was part of a long-sustained war on the family. The nadir of this kind of thinking says that a decision to abort a child is a decision between a woman and her doctor. The father of the child is stripped of any legal ability to protect the life of his own legitimate child. We need to retrace all of our steps in order to discover how a travesty like that could ever happen. And when we do, we discover that a lot of it started at Seneca Falls. And that God is currently judging America, one of the most fruitful nations ever to exist. And he is judging us by turning us over to the fruitless deeds of darkness. He is letting us run headlong into the void where no fruit grows, where no harvest has ever been gathered. Fruitless. Pay attention to that italicized adjective, fruitless. What is anal intercourse? Among other things, fruitless. What do puberty blockers bring about? Fruitlessness. What is abortion? Violent and bloody fruitlessness. What is the dink, double income, no kids lifestyle? Fruitless. America has enslaved herself to the terrible bondage of orgasms without consequences. Under the weight of this severe judgment, we have demanded as our constitutional prerogative the right to become as fruitless as a dried-out stick. It is our constitutional right, or so we have argued, to be struck in the forehead with the hammer of God.
Well, well, well. Now we know a lot more about good old Reverend Doug Wilson, the man who marries pedophiles. Now he says, clergy, you never know, you don't understand the role and what happens and things you have to do. You get to choose who you marry. It's not a requirement. You're not compelled to perform anyone's wedding unless you are in agreement with the union. So he can miss me with the idea that somehow there is this deep, deep theological and philosophical reason why you would have to marry someone who is a pedophile. You don't have to. But I think that goes to the claims that there could perhaps be an abusive strain, a willingness to look the other way in this particular movement when it comes to male oppression over women. He let slip, I believe, one of the underlying pieces in the movement. He let slip the white male rage, the white male oppression aspect of Christian nationalism that really is what sits at the root of all of it. It's white male oppression, this theme, white male rage, white male exclusion, that Christian nationalism is seen as a way to address that or to provide redress for perceived slights, for perceived oppression of white men in an America that is too diverse, that provides too much voice for women, that provides too much voices for the stranger. And so that is at the crux of this. He did a good job of hiding it in that particular scene and interview for the most part, kind of dabbing and stepping. But at the end of the day, he had to let you know who he really was. And then obviously in the other clips that are more for his target audience, he obviously could be more free in the intent of what this, as he called it, Christian nationalist project is really all about. What he said about women. Women are the type of people that people come from. That's it. You are the handmaid's tale. Your job is to just bear them babies. That's what you're made for. And then he went on to say it doesn't take any talent to reproduce biologically. Well, we know he wasn't referring to the man's contribution to the project, if I may use his term, but he was talking about the woman, her carrying a child, bringing a child to term, and then raising said child. In his world view, doesn't require much. Anybody can do it. And sadly, I believe in the state of Georgia, when they let that sister stay on life support until she had the child, that was that type of a mentality, that there is nothing but the physical body bearing of the child that is required to give life. That, I believe, is part of that underpinning that we see seeping into our society. He talks about that there was a flaw. So in his women voting, the idea that it's problematic, that somehow it's taking away, it's diluted what was given to the man. Like he just can't believe women's suffrage did this to the household. It was this dirty scheme that has misled the woman into doing this thing that she was not supposed to do. She wasn't supposed to vote, because then the household would be able to do the voting together. And obviously, they're two individuals that may have two different thoughts on what's important. But that is a prominent theme in Christian nationalism. This idea that women should not have the individual right to vote, but that the vote should sit in the household. The household. And you've heard this term, a household vote, or the one household vote, as opposed to individual votes. This is where that strain of thought is coming from. It's coming from Christian nationalism. This idea that women should not have the right to vote, but that the vote belongs in the household. Obviously, his entire analogy is trash, because he makes this one enormous assumption, which is that every woman is married. Now, we're not going to talk about the idiotic nature of it all, but just even the fact that he is saying it was this scheme, this plot, this plan. Well, if a woman isn't married, how is the household's vote diluted? And in their world, she will be married so early, I would make the assumption that she would never be in her own household because they want to go back to the good old days. And so you will basically have the equivalent, I would imagine, of just above legal brides immediately going into the home of a man. And so therefore she would never have an individual vote. I believe that that would be the progression that makes that analogy even remotely plausible logically. Now, does it mean that it is an accurate analogy? Absolutely not. But that is that strain of thought. That's the progression that you get to when you're saying that women's suffrage took that vote away. Because in their minds, they want to go back to a time where there are no single women who have the ability to vote. Because in theory, every woman would be married. And therefore, the vote would belong, in essence, to the husband, who would be the patriarch of the home. And they would then come together and then decide, as a family, what the issue would be. But we all know that when you have that level of authoritative, or I would say oppressive presence in a relationship, the person who is the dominant figure, and in their worldview, that will be the man, that's the one who's going to get the vote, because that's the one who's going to go to vote, because she's going to be at home with the 8 kids in their worldview. And so that's something that is a consistent, persistent theme throughout Christian nationalism, is the subservient nature of the male-female husband-wife relationship. And then he just goes off the rails at the end with the fruitless one. Literally, just off the rails. Everything is fruitless unless it's a husband and a wife. He said LGBTQAI relationships, fruitless. Puberty blockers, fruitless. Abortion, fruitless. Double income with no kids, fruitless. Like orgasms, these are orgasms without consequences. It's literally a little bit insane where they're going with this level, with this ideology. But again, if we think about what happened to Vice President Kamala Harris and the attacks on her for not being a biological mom, even though she stepped in and raised stepchildren, this is that attack that somehow she was less than because she did not biologically birth children. Again, this Christian nationalist strain that had made its way into our modern dialogue, into, in this instance, our political discussions. It didn't come from nowhere. It came from this strain of thought. So we have to be aware that this thing is wide open at this point, and it's kind of infiltrated the ways in which we talk about things, view things, the politics, and all of it, far beyond just its presence or its coming out party at the Charlie Kirk memorial service. It has already been here and moving its way into how we are seeing policy done. So we just have to be aware. So I wanted to bring Doug Wilson to our attention because he is the modern day architect that has been basically lifted up as the prophet for white Christian nationalism. Now, next episode will be on Joel Weeborn. He is literally, there is no one, you don't have to question where he stands. He is a 10 toes down white Christian nationalist. And so our next episode, we will hear some of his thoughts and comments on Christian nationalism that will show us really, I'll be quite honest, really the crux of what this project is all about. I'm Elliot Robinson on the R3 podcast. Until next time, take care and God bless.